Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm Barry Draycott with Terra Environmental. This is our continuing series on eco-friendly methods and products to take care of landscaping, turf a lot, but also trying to get away from turf with native plants, and also how to, again, get away from the hard chemicals and concentrate on growing healthy plants. I'm honored tonight. We have two young women from Herbicide Free Campus, which is a student-run organization through many different campuses throughout the country. Sheina Crystal and Bridget Gustafsson. Did I say that right, Crystal?
Yeah, it's Sheina. Yeah, right.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sheina. Okay, sorry. So anyway, they're going to talk about what they've been doing, and specifically, they did an impact report in 2021, and that I think is mostly what they're going to be talking about. So I'm going to turn it over to you two.
Awesome, thank you, Barry. So yes, we are Herbicide Free Campus, and our mission is to empower the next generation of environmental leaders to create safer, more sustainable living and learning environments for all. And we do this by starting locally and empowering students to advocate for organic land care on their college campuses. I think our big vision is to see the end of all synthetic toxic pesticide use, but that's a huge issue. And so starting on college campuses and educating the youth as they come into these places of learning is really where we're focused at the moment. So our vision is to, as I said, a toxin-free world created by student action. So empowering the youth of today to be aware of these chemicals as they graduate college and go into their professional lives, and maybe they can become advocates in whatever field they go into for end to synthetic pesticide use. And I'll let Bridget talk about the history of our organization.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sheina. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. So diving a little bit into the history of Herbicide Free Campus, it was actually begun by myself and another young woman, Mackenzie Feldman, in 2017. And so we both were on the beach volleyball team at UC Berkeley, which is where this began, and walked onto our courts one day for practice. And our coaches told us, hey, if you hit a ball over here, don't go get it. They just sprayed chemicals, so we just have to leave it for 24 hours. And that really was the origin of all of this, because Mackenzie, having grown up in Hawaii, and myself having grown up in Illinois, smack dab in the middle of industrial or industrial sized cornfields, right, that used a ton of herbicides and pesticides, and having had several family members with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnoses, we both paused. And that pause, after hearing our coach say that, really led to the beginning of all of this. And so we asked the groundskeepers, the athletic groundskeepers, if we could, instead of having them spray the herbicides, if we could have our team pick the weeds. And that began this whole movement. And so from our beach volleyball courts, we moved on to the rest of campus, really, and worked to secure a grant so that the groundskeepers on the main campus would be able to put together a pilot project. And so we brought in Chip Osborne, who I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, to come up with a land care maintenance program for the two largest green spaces on campus. And they were basically our equivalent of quads. And so that was over a 3-year period that Chip was advising them and really just teaching those groundskeepers how to manage in this organic way so that they would be empowered and have the knowledge and the tools to then take that sort of land care maintenance to the rest of the green spaces on campus. And so all the while this was happening and the groundskeepers were learning this knowledge, Mackenzie and I were working with other students and with faculty to advocate against the use of glyphosate on all University of California system campuses. And so in 2019, through this advocacy work alongside, the work of countless other individuals and organizations and municipalities, the University of California president issued a temporary glyphosate ban on all 10 of the UC campuses. So this was really the jumping point for the herbicide free becoming a national campaign. Okay, Sheina, can you go to the next one? Thank you. So in 2020, we began working with 18 schools in 10 states. And these were, different schools that had heard about our work or seen articles or videos that we had done and were interested. So we just kind of like shot out of the gates of this national campaign, right? We did a high school pilot program and different research projects for students, and got a staff of 5 people, but then, needed to, with the COVID pandemic and just needing maybe a little more focus, we in 2021 refocused our efforts on a more succinct 12-month long fellowship program. And so that's what we currently do and that is how we maintain the mission that Sheina shared with you of empowering the next generation of student leaders. So they undergo a 12-month long fellowship. And basically in this year-long program, they are taught our herbicide free campus theory of change. They're taught, this idea and this collaborative model of collaborating with the groundskeepers, as opposed to vilifying or, diminishing the lived experience and lived working experience of people who are on the ground taking care of the landscape, who oftentimes, as a result of understaffing or under resources, have to rely on these chemicals or don't have the necessary time or resources in order to look into alternatives. And so us as students are able to, step in and devote that time, the energy, hands towards that. And they are also learning in this fellowship sort of direct organizing principles. So different things as far as petition writing, how to gain momentum for a campaign, advocacy work, things of that nature. So it's arming them in those ways as well. And finally, in 2022, which we will get to dive into with you all, is the report that we recently published, which is a case study and cost benefit analysis of some universities who have gone either completely herbicide free or who have reduced their herbicide usage greatly. And then we are also launching a certification for institutions of higher education to get certified, sort of reminiscent of a LEED certification. So we'll have different tiers and gold, silver, bronze, which again, we will get into later in this presentation. And so our next fellowship class begins in August of this year, and we're actually doing interviews for that now. So if any of you have connections to either universities, to college students who you think might be passionate or interested in this work, please feel free to share our information. And our contact information, as well as website, we will put at the end of our with you.
Thanks, Bridget. So Bridget kind of touched on some of our big accomplishments, and I'll just go over them a little more. So because of the work that Herbicide Free, it was then called Herbicide Free Cal, and now is called Herbicide Free Campus, did at UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley is now 95% organic. So those organic test pilot sites ended up educating and empowering the grounds team, and they now manage 95% of the campus without synthetic pesticides, which is amazing. And as Bridget said, the UC issued a temporary glyphosate ban and then has since created a whole new pesticide policy with mandatory integrated pest management on all campuses and IPM committees on all campuses, and has banned the use of glyphosate for everyday use. And there's now like a very rigorous process to kind of apply to be able to use restricted chemicals, including glyphosate. Mackenzie traveled with a large coalition to Hawaii and brought Lee Johnson there and helped to get Hawaii public schools to go herbicide free. Our last class of fellows have had amazing progress. Our fellows at Grinnell embarked on a prairie restoration project without using any herbicides. So as many, I'm sure many of you know, habitat restoration tends to be a place where environmentalists can support the use of herbicides to kill the plants that are there, to then replace the plants with native species. But the Grinnell students helped to prove that that's not necessary, and they used a sod cutter to cut up the turf that was in the middle of campus and then replaced it with a bunch of native prairie plants. And they actually just broke ground on the second prairie restoration site last week. So it's been very successful, and they're expanding to the rest of campus. And then at Emory University and Brandeis University, our fellows there are in the process of trying to get funding and working with their grounds teams to break ground on organic pilot projects and the publication of a first of its kind report, which is what we will be diving into next. Oh yes, and our program areas. So as we kind of talked about, we have our student fellowship. We're launching our ground up advocacy boot camp. So that's for anyone who's looking to learn more about the intersectionality of the pesticide use issue and how to advocate for organic land care in their communities. We do a lot of events like this one, and we publish our own research, and we're doing about to launch our certification. So without further ado, I will dive into talking about the report we just published, which is called The State of Ecological Campus Land Management Across the US. So the reason that we thought this research and this report was important was because oftentimes when our fellows are beginning conversations with their grounds team or their sustainability directors, they're asked, what are the long-term costs of an organic transition? If we are to start to reduce our synthetic pesticide use, won't it cost more? Won't we need to have more workers? They have all these preconceived notions about the cost and the effectiveness of using herbicide-free methods to manage the campus. So this report really helps to highlight the amazing practices that are being done at colleges across the country to show that it is 100% possible to ditch synthetic pesticides and to reduce costs, reduce labor hours, and save money while doing this transition. So that's really what this report shows. And again, to fill in those knowledge gaps and to highlight the best practices. So what are these campuses that are spearheading this collegiate land care revolution? What are they doing to achieve the cost savings and the water savings? And to convince others to join in on this herbicide-free land care methods. So the way we went about doing this research is we had some research fellows last summer who interviewed groundskeepers and sustainability professionals at 8 institutions of higher education. And then we also conducted a survey of over 30 sustainability and grounds professionals at colleges across the country. So really a diverse array of people were spoken to and were surveyed, and a lot of different campuses gave us really helpful input. So the colleges that were included in the interviews were UT Austin, Reed College, Seattle University, UC Berkeley, UC Boulder, Willamette, Cascadia University, and UW-Bothell, which are co-located on a campus together, and Harvard University. So these were the campuses that we found that are really spearheading a transition away from synthetic pesticides in their land care. So I'll just dive into some general results, and Bridget will talk more in depth next about the case studies that we really went into. But just in general, water savings, lots of the schools we talked to had significant water savings. Harvard's campus's water use dropped 30%, saving nearly 2 million gallons of water every year after their organic transition. Willamette University saw a 25 to 30% decrease in water use after their organic transition. Cascadia College and University of Washington Bothell saw a similar 26% decrease in water use. So all around that 25 to 30% range for all of the campuses that had water use data, which many don't, surprisingly. And it can be hard to siphon out like irrigation water use, but for all of those that did have that quality data, a 25 to 30% range for water savings, which is really important, especially in a state like in some of these states that are maybe more prone to drought. In terms of improvement to soil health, University of Colorado Boulder, the lab that they were sending their soil samples to, said that the soil sample they sent in had the highest level of soil organic matter that the lab had ever seen. And after the organic transition at UC Berkeley, there was 22 times the amount of microorganisms in the soil as before, which is really, really impressive. And then in terms of cost savings, because everyone cares about money, Willamette saves approximately $2,000 a year. Cascadia College and University of Washington Bothell estimate that they're spending about 1/10 the amount that they once were on their conventional lawns. So that I think is the biggest cost savings that we've seen. And then Harvard, it did a bunch of different things to reduce their costs, including eliminating paying for the removal of yard waste and implementing on-site composting, which they then use as an alternative to fertilizer. And this saves them about $35,000 annually in not having to dispose of their yard waste, and then an additional $10,000 because they don't have to buy fertilizer for their campus anymore. And I'll let Bridget dive deeper into some of these schools and the practices that they've implemented to achieve these cost savings. Oh, and Bridget, yeah, you got it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, it didn't let me unmute there for a second. Okay, great. Yeah, so we can jump right into Cascadia College and University of Washington Bothell. If Sheina, you'd like to proceed, wonderful. And so for those of you who are unfamiliar with the school, it's in Washington, as you might imagine. It's 135 acres, and this case study was unique in the sense that their FM team decided it was they were using conventional herbicides, chemicals, everything. And then one day the administration said, nope, no more. And so from that day forward, the facilities management team had to commit to toxin-free landscaping. And as you might imagine, the first thing that increased was the labor hours necessary to manage the land organically. And so when we talked with the FM manager of Cascadia College and UW Bothell, the thing that he mentioned was they found that they really needed, yes, of course, a landscaping practice switch, but more importantly, they needed a cultural shift and going toxin free. And so, you can only change your inputs so many times, but they really had to view their whole landscape that they took care of as a closed loop system. And so what they chose to do was focus on the highly trafficked areas on campus and really just created this zoned approach where they looked at the most high profile areas on campus. And some things that they did was reducing the use of chemical fertilizers so that they would slow their lawn growth and then have to mow less. They stopped shearing shrubs into shapes, allowed them to grow naturally. They left perennials to stand until late fall and winter when there was a lessened workload. And as you can see, they are now spending, as Sheina mentioned, about a 10th amount of money that they used to on the lawns. And some of the cost saving ways that they focused on rebuilding the campus landscape and the ecosystem was they previously had used beauty bark. And so once they started this toxin-free transition, they began to mulch with arborist wood chips that they were either able to produce by themselves or that they could get for free. And they stopped shipping their garden and yard waste off of campus and began composting on site, and then using the compost in their planting beds. And so, they, like I mentioned before, it's this cultural shift of, instead of having to do many of the things that are so typical on college campuses, such as carting off all of the yard waste, they began to utilize that as a resource, and that was all for free. And the final bullet point is that they do now have a food forest that they are working on. And again, they have about 30 fruit trees, and it's sort of this living laboratory, showing what can be done with sustainable land care. And they're just a phenomenal example of a program in a college that's just really bought in to viewing the landscape as a whole ecosystem, engaging both the landscape and the gardening team, in a very holistic, comprehensive way. And so I think something super notable is how much their water usage has dropped. It's dropped by almost 26% between the years of 2006 and 2013. So they attribute much of this to some of the new practices that they developed with mulching. They believe that the soil food web and the increased soil structure really helped in water retention, as well as stopping spraying of fungicides and herbicides that would kill the soil microbes. And again, here are some further bullet points just describing some of the other things that they did while being able to maintain the overall aesthetic results, because I'm sure, as you all are familiar, as well as what facilities management at many universities are acutely aware of, is aesthetics are very important, and especially for lawns and green spaces. People love their green lawns without the dandelions and things of that sort. So they found that they were able to maintain a similarly pleasing aesthetic through their new cultural shifts. Okay, and next up we have Willamette University, which is in Salem, Oregon. They have 61 acres, so smaller than UW, but still have about 3,700 students. And they have been managing their university about 90% organically since 2007. And this transition was actually initiated by their grounds manager. His name's Jim Anderson, after one of his fellow crew members began to suffer some physical reactions every time he used this one herbicide. And then Jim Anderson was also concerned because his son would come to work with him often, and so he just became much more aware, especially when noting that before the transition they were using 59 different synthetic chemicals and spending $6,000. And so initially what they tried to do was just a product swap, and so taking all these synthetic chemicals and just swapping them for OMRI certified chemicals. So not only did their budget increase vastly, but they did not see the same efficacy. So when this did not work, they contacted and took a course through Oregon Tilth, which I'm not sure if you guys have heard of, but it no longer exists. But he and other staff members at Willamette became accredited in organic landscaping, and received both educational and technical support in order to make the transition. And so some of the practices that they highlighted when we interviewed them was the replacement of non-native plants with native perennials, as well as with drought tolerant shrubs. And so this was all geared towards really reducing the need for external inputs such as water and, additional labor and maintenance. And again, like UW Bothell, they reduced the amount of shaping that they did on their shrubs and just allowed the plants to grow into their natural shapes to save labor costs. But unlike UW Bothell, they turned to flame weeding. And so flame weeding and also student work days. So they actually have student workers, and they will have student groups that work paid and unpaid with the campus grounds in order to pull weeds. And they admit that, the presence of weeds on campus since this transition has increased slightly. But they have done some amazing work with different signage and educational campaigns to educate campus goers on, if somebody walks by and they see a dandelion or they see some clover, that this is actually a good thing, and that they are, this is at the cost of being a toxin-free campus. And so they also have seen a great amount of water usage. Yep, sorry, last point is that 25 to 30% reduction in water use. And I just really appreciate this quote that Jim Anderson gave us in the last interview. And he said, "We found that being an organic campus has made our campus really attractive to potential students who value a safe living and learning environment." And as a student myself, or a previous student myself, I find that to be very true. So just wanted to note that. All right, and then our third and final case study that we wanted to look at is Harvard. And they are 90% organic, and they have been that way since 2010 over their 5,000 acres. And like UW Bothell, this transition was motivated by their senior leadership, and they took a similar approach to what we did at UC Berkeley, where they did a pilot program. And so they took a small plot of land and sort of did this, as a test to see if it would work. And theirs, if I'm correct, was close to their student housing services. And so they created this, a plan that would allow this 1 acre pilot plot to apply natural compost teas in order to balance the soil biology and try to restore the natural nutrient cycling. And then expanded that once they saw positive effects to the rest of campus. And they now use significantly less water. Irrigation needs have dropped about 30%, saving actually about 2 million gallons of water per year, which is quite astonishing. And similar to UW Bothell, they spent $35,000 annually before 2008 in order to remove landscape waste from their campus grounds. But as part of this organic transition, they began composting the landscape waste instead of paying for its removal. And so they were able to use the resulting compost as natural fertilizer, and then saved an additional $10,000 per year, not having to purchase synthetic fertilizers. So that, I guess the final point with that is, again, just the very intentional plant placement and selection, doing a lot of moisture maintenance to help reduce plant susceptibility to pests and disease. And yeah, I mean, we constantly see, and I feel as if I'm being very repetitive, but just saying that cultural shift of changing some of those very deeply entrenched practices of carting away the, all the yard waste, or growing non-native annuals and things of that nature. Harvard changed that, along with UW Bothell and Willamette. And these are some bullet points of their success that they've had. Okay, Sheina, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Bridget.
Mhm.
So in addition to the interviews and the case studies, we also did a survey. And so this is just a little brief overview of the survey results. So 76% of schools indicated that they would consider going organic and significantly reducing synthetic pesticide usage. And for 32% of the people who filled out the survey, this was mainly because of personal concern for their own safety, the safety of the people on their campus. They felt concerned about the amount of pesticides and the types of pesticides that their campus is currently using. But that the biggest barrier across the board to going organic is a general lack of knowledge. So, not knowing how to implement organic land care, not knowing how to ditch synthetic pesticides. And 80% of schools practice some form of conventional land care. So, most of these schools, most of the 30 schools practice conventional land care, use synthetic pesticides. Most of the schools that practice conventional land care would consider going organic, but none of them know how. So that's really kind of how we see ourselves fitting into this picture, is getting students on board with organic land care and helping to provide that kind of just transition to the grounds team and providing education. And now we'll kind of pivot and talk about the certification that we'll be launching soon, which will hopefully help fill in some of these knowledge gaps and help get more schools to make the leap to ditch synthetic pesticides. So the certification will highlight schools that are pioneering organic land care. We have a tiered certification system, which I'll dive into, and we're hoping to launch the first batch of certified schools very soon, which will be very exciting. So we're hoping to we have sent out the application to some schools that we've worked closely with, and we're waiting for them to fill it out, and we're hoping to launch officially very soon. So this is a preview. I think you're the first audience to see what the certification, hear what it might look like, which is super exciting. So,
and Bridget, I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you approach colleges for the first time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we mostly do that through the students, unless a college approaches us. But we have students who come to us, they'll email us like, I heard about your work, I would like to do this on my campus, or they apply to the fellowship. And we provide them education and mentorship as they go in and try to meet with their grounds team or their sustainability professionals to start this on their campuses.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So for the bronze, we really want this to be kind of like an entry level. We want the certification to be inclusive and not be prohibitive. So to be certified bronze, 50% of the managed campus area, not including sports fields, has to be managed without synthetic pesticides. And the campus has to have an IPM policy or some kind of policy that indicates that synthetic pesticides should be used only as a last resort. And they have to also show that they are implementing this policy. The campus must be able to detail the work of any contractors. We've had fellows at schools where all the land care is contracted out, and that can make it kind of difficult to work with the school to eliminate synthetic pesticides. So making sure that contractors are on board with maintaining the certification status. The campus also has to have a plan to continue to reduce synthetic pesticide use and achieve a higher level of the certification in the future. They have to be able to provide pesticide usage reports from the past 12 months and show us what they have been using. And they'll be using Herbicide Free Campus signage to highlight that they've been certified and to highlight the organic areas on their campus. So kind of to spread that education component to anyone who's walking by any organic areas on campus. The silver standard, to the silver level of the certification, they have to achieve everything that bronze is. It kind of builds on itself. So for the silver, 70% of the managed campus areas, not including sports fields, have to be managed without synthetic pesticides, has to have all of the things that the bronze level requires. And then also the campus grounds department must collaborate with students on some level and engage students to any degree in campus land care. The campus must also test soil health to our standards. We have pretty rigorous standards. We've spoken to a lot of experts, and we have some labs we recommend. And the campus has to also be taking steps to reduce synthetic fertilizer use. Because, you know, as we all know, you can't really get rid of synthetic pesticides if you're not also getting rid of the synthetic fertilizers. So really ensuring that the transition is holistic, and they're getting there and they're getting better. The gold level, they have to have 90% of the campus managed areas, excluding sports fields, be managed without synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. So this is kind of that next level. So there's no synthetic fertilizers either. And they must be actively working to increase the presence of native plants on campus. And they must also be actively working to reduce water use on campus through landscape management. So with this, we're really trying to go above and beyond just like the baseline of cutting out synthetic pesticides and trying to incentivize campuses to have more sustainable landscaping practices overall. And then platinum, which would be the highest, so 100% of the campus managed areas, including the sports fields, which none of the other levels do. So the platinum is where the sports fields come into play, must be managed without synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, and must only use synthetic pesticides or fertilizers as an absolute last resort. Most of the groundskeepers we've spoken to say, okay, you could be like 99% synthetic pesticide free, but if there's this kind of tree that is endangered or very important, and there's an insect that's eating the tree, you have to have an ability to use an emergency method, or if there's poison oak or some other kind of plant that might pose a danger to students. So we do allow kind of workaround, but it really is strict, and we require that the campuses that are applying at this level, if they do spray a synthetic, have to report to us what was used, how much, and why. And we reserve the right to take action if we think that it was inaccurate. And we hope that we can connect those campuses with experts in the field to suggest alternatives for potential future encounters with the same problem. And then the campus has to design landscapes that require less management overall. And then the campus has to commit to procuring new technology that is electric for landscaping. So getting rid of any gas or diesel powered, like leaf blowers or any other equipment that might be being used on campus and emitting air pollution. So we really are trying to make this very holistic. And here are just some photos of students at work. A lot of what our fellows do is weeding days. So getting out there alongside the grounds team and providing some extra hands to eliminate weeds without herbicides. We like to say using hands, not herbicides. And with that, I think that wraps it up, and we're ready for any questions. I see that there's lots of questions in the chat. So however we want to do this.
Yes, and thank you all before question and answer begins for your time and for letting me and Sheina take up a little bit of your night. Below, you can see the general contacts and our website and things of that sort. And me and Sheina can drop it to the chat, our work emails for Herbicide Free Campus, so that you can contact us personally if you would like. We'd be happy to hear from you.
Fantastic. We have quite a few questions actually from John, and I don't know if John can actually unmute himself, because at one point I couldn't unmute myself. So John, if you
have that skill, by the way.
There we are. There we are.
I knew you did, John. I knew it.
Do you want me to chime in quick?
Yeah, I was kind of hoping we'd have a conversation because your questions were very good.
Okay, I'm not going to dwell on what your pitch would be, because honestly, I think it was covered very well. More than anything else, the pitch here is the benefits. So we're going to move on from that. Let's see, what else did I ask? My memory is short, so I'm going to have to check this out.
You asked if it was going to be just campuses or if they were expanding.
That's the one I'm looking at right now. Do you have intentions of bringing this more mainstream? Because I know campuses are a more insular venue, but if this is really good stuff, I'm wondering if you want to branch out at all.
Oh, well, thank you. I am flattered that you think it's great stuff. I think we're all honored. But yeah, I think we definitely are our big picture vision. And I think what everyone on our team is passionate about is taking this far beyond the college campus. We see this as a really kind of a starting ground. And so many like changes in our society have started at college campuses when, and if colleges show that they can ditch these chemicals and change their ag extension programs or change their courses that they're giving out to give credit to landscapers, then we can really change the whole system. And I think that's kind of our big vision.
That is what I'm hoping for too, because we have sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to add all the things Sheina mentioned. And, we feel so lucky because while we get to do this work on college campuses, the other tract is that we're also getting to, educate and empower these new student leaders. And I think for myself, and I don't want to speak for Sheina or for anyone else on the staff, but this issue becomes quite consuming, right? Because it is everywhere. And so I think we are all working in the hopes of that through that investment we give to our students that go through our fellowship, they will continue this work in their professional careers as well, outside of college campuses.
Please send some of these students out into the mainstream, because we have a very hard-headed environment, which is not just among the people doing maintenance and whatnot, but also the entire environment, such as the big box retailers. Everybody stresses some kind of chemical. And the mindset's going to take time to change, but if enough people voice it, it's going to help a lot.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely. And it's definitely, from the ground up. And again, you younger folks are the future. And, like I said at the beginning, I relate because that's how I started too. It's a long battle. There are a lot of entrenched ideas and forces and money behind keeping things at the status quo. But things need to change, and I'm very hopeful that they will change to just keep up the great work.
I agree. In particular, stressing battery equipment, stressing water use reduction, stressing every way to do things as a best management practice is the future. Thankfully, a lot of people are thinking about it. Not enough at this moment in time, but like you said, there's always the future and hope.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to note Mackenzie, who also works for Herbicide Free Campus, dropped in the chat that ultimately our hope with the certification is that it can be applied to all different kinds of campuses, not just college campuses, whether that's like a hospital campus or a tech campus or things that have a large piece of land associated with them. So.
Yeah, my final take on it, I would love your any data you have on the high readings of soil organic matter you've observed as a result of decreasing the pesticide use, because that's actually very interesting on a water saving venue.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can, if you put your email in the chat, we can email you after. I don't have those numbers on me at the moment while I'm sharing my screen.
When you had a slide where you discussed the microbial, for lack of a better word, bloom in the soil.
Yeah.
Did you have a timeline on that, like where you saw the most bloom, or how long it took to get to that level?
So at Berkeley, I believe the soil tests where they showed like a 22 times increase in the amount of microorganisms in the soil, I believe that was 2 years of like past the start of the transition. So it was like two years into the organic transition. And
did you max out at 2 years, or did it continue, or did you stop measuring?
I would, my answer to that would be, unfortunately, I think the soil testing may have not continued. And that's something we've seen with transitions at most of these schools that we've talked to, and why we're really, really excited to have some of these new transitions hopefully start to happen soon, is because the data collection just hasn't been there. Throughout the duration of the transition, there's been, little bits of data collected here and there at all of these campuses, but we really would like to see, quality longitudinal study on the data throughout a single transition at a campus.
Have you found, because like Diana and I have found that it really, like the water quality where you come into a situation is very impactful to getting to that place of maximum or ideal biome in the soil. Like, have you guys noticed that too, or have you found what have you found that impacts that biome?
I don't know, Bridget, do you have an answer?
Comment on
well,
that for a moment, if you like. Let me
yes,
just chime in for a moment.
Oh, go
In
ahead.
particular, water source, just to let you know, deep well waters tend to be very sterile in a lot of ways, other than mineral content, whereas reservoir waters tend to have some organic content to it. So reservoir stored waters from rainfall and that are laying in the outdoor ecosystem tend to be better for the use.
That's really cool. I did not know that. Thank you.
John is an irrigation specialist.
Okay, got it.
Well, thank you,
Yeah.
John. That is helpful.
Yeah.
What I will say, Rachel, to your question, is that we have kind of been at the mercy of what campuses have collected via their own volition. We are now, the schools that we have campus fellowships at, we are implementing, standardized questions and soil testing, but a lot of these schools that we interviewed, we ran up against the continual block of like, oh, well, we didn't track our water usage, or we didn't track our soil microbial content. And so we, unfortunately, with this report, we were at the mercy of what they had. I will say that the Willamette study, the UW Bothell study, where we showed the initial slide and then also the water usage slide, that was from 2006 to 2013, and they attributed. We didn't include the graph that contained the soil microbial count. We just showed you the water, but there is a graph that coincides with that we can look at the soil structure, and so that can be shared if you're interested. But again, that was 2006 to 2013.
Interesting. I wonder sometimes that the salt content and the chlorine, like if you have a place where you've got reclaimed water that's of kind of a industrial variety, it seems like that for the purposes of, microbial blooming, they seem to be very poor options, but many municipalities, at least in a park setting, that's what you get. So, yeah, I don't know. On campuses too, I was curious if do you ever come up against synthetic turf, and is that on your radar to work on?
That's a great question. I think most of our work thus far has really focused on the campus itself and not the athletic fields. And we haven't worked with a campus yet that has synthetic turf in the campus area, the direct campus area. I think lots of schools use synthetic turf for their sports fields. So sports field management is something we're getting into with the certification. I think most schools, have to meet the NCAA whatever standards. And we've worked with schools that have achieved those standards without the synthetic pesticides. But I think the knowledge there is even further behind the general campus management. So we're getting there. Because I know, the PFAS and all the other chemicals in the synthetic turf is really awful.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like talk about a giant elephant in the room. It's the giant 10-foot deep plastic carpet sitting on tire chrome, off gassing and polluting it yeah. And it's its own nuanced battle for sure. Yeah. But it's everything you would hope it wouldn't be, and it is. And yeah, anyway, that's a whole nother fact. You know what, we should have a whole thing on synthetic turf, honestly. Barry, you might consider that, because it's a big conversation.
Yeah, we can do that. Yep.
Definitely.
When it comes to water quality, it's absolutely amazing the differences out there. Many years I've taught alternative water uses, and we found fertilizer use in particular was drastically reduced whenever we were drawing out of a lake or a river versus, of course, city water and any other source. Deep wells, generally speaking, we always encourage our clients not to lime because the amount of minerals and limestone that came up in a lot of the wells in northern New Jersey. So if people really want to do it and get on board with this, it's always a good idea to test your water source and figure out how to jigger the formula a little bit to make sure that you're not applying things you don't need, and whether or not you need to add additional organic matter, et cetera.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a good question. Do you guys do soil tests prior? I mean, I'm sure you must do some type of, and what type of soil tests do you do prior to working at a campus?
Yeah, so we actually, so for the certification, campuses that will apply will need to have a soil test done in 4 months leading up to their application date. But prior to this, we haven't had soil tests done at any of the campuses we've worked with, other than Berkeley, that has undergone a full transition, just because, as Bridget kind of said, these campuses aren't doing those soil tests on their own. And unfortunately, because it would be helpful for them if they knew what was going on in their soil, but they don't do them, and we can't force them to. So we hope that with the certification will incentivize the testing of the soil and a more regular testing of the soil to kind of keep track of what's going on as you move away from the synthetic chemicals.
So that's good to do continuous soil monitoring. It's kind of sometimes amazes me, and like, look, I've spent about 0 hours on college campuses in the last 10 years, 20, 30 years maybe. But it amazes me. They have all these science departments and microscopes and all these people learning science, and yet nobody willing to like do one soil sample within it. You know, it
Yes.
amazes me. If you could engage the science department on that, boy, wouldn't that be a,
Yeah,
that'd be something.
we've had the same discussion. We are actually currently, the UC's banned glyphosate and made it harder to use a bunch of other restricted chemicals, but we really want them to commit to going organic. So we've been kind of having this conversation internally of there shouldn't be the need to bring in a consultant to help the UCs go organic. Like, there has to be the brain power on all 10 UC campuses to figure out how to ditch synthetic pesticides. And if they can't do that, then I don't know what your PhD is for. Like they have, like, all the scientists on the UC campuses have to be able to come together and put together a really solid research project. Oh yes, exactly. UCs are well funded by Big Chem. Yes, that's.
Can I ask you too, like, how do you guys get your do you pull a records request within the campus, like, and show them, like, look how many gallons or units of synthetic pesticides, fertilizers, whatever their inputs are? Do you ever like show them, like, look, this is what you're using? And I found this occasionally to be significant when talking to a city, that if you show them the chemicals they're using, because if you ask a city, they'll say, oh, we would never use anything toxic. And then you pull a public records request and they're like, what? We're using toxic stuff? Yeah, let me give you the list of birth defects and toxic exposures that you're putting out there when you use these chemicals. And we show them and they're kind of like stunned, amazed that's going on. It's like, for some reason, this is news.
Yes.
But it kind of moves the needle a little bit. But how do you guys pull a public records request, or do you even have to?
So unfortunately, colleges do the shittiest, excuse my language, job of keeping track of what they're spraying on their campuses. So most campuses have no records, or like handwritten, you can't read it records, or they have some records, but they're not full records. So when we ask a school, we usually just go directly to the groundskeeper, and we have our students email them a kind email asking to meet and asking, I'm curious what's being used on the campus. And sometimes the groundskeeper gives them a big list, and sometimes they say, oh, well, we actually don't keep track of anything. Or
it's not legal.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. yes,
Yeah, I wonder too,
tough.
another avenue might be through your, I don't know if it's the bursar's office, probably not, but the office of whoever handles your pay, because somebody's buying it, and that, you know, you could ask for the records around purchasing, because boy, I don't know if you put that into your cost savings analysis when you run it, like, look, you're no longer having to buy these chemicals, but the cost of some of these synthetic chemicals are now skyrocketing, making what you have to offer that much more attractive. And it just seems like, wow, don't let that opportunity die on, you know, that's a good one for you guys, because they're only getting more expensive. Prices don't seem to be dropping on any of that stuff. And now you've almost got apples to apples in a cost comparison, almost, not quite, but almost.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you know, going back to pesticide records, any EPA registered pesticide, they have to keep records of what was applied, at what rate, and how much, and when. Those records, they might, I guess they're burying them, but that is law that has to be done.
Yeah, yeah. It you know, is mind-boggling to us that despite the fact that it's law, no one seems to check that they aren't keeping quality records, and besides us. So we're working on it. That's part of why the requirement to get certified is to be able to submit their pesticide usage reports from the past 12 months. Is if they're not keeping track, then they can't get certified.
So who's the enforcer? This it came up as a question. It's usually by the state. So you would contact your state Department of Environmental Protection, or whatever it's called in the state.
Yeah.
You know, interesting. I see the mention about using cuttings on campus. That's always been one of the old school methods of keeping your lawn healthy and reducing the amount of nitrogen you have to put down. The only drawback is that management practices in the commercial maintenance area, they don't come in the spring and cut 1/3 of the stalk off like they should. They usually let it get kind of long and then they eventually cut it. So stressing mowing practices if you're dealing with turf on campus is absolutely essential.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Well,
All
we're
right.
cutting it fine on time now.
You read my mind, Rachel. So I want to thank you all again for tuning in. Great education tonight, and it really helps me have more faith in the future due to youth like you. I shouldn't call you youth anymore. You're young women and men. But yeah, again, thank you very much. I have another question. How can anybody make donations to your organization?
Oh, Mackenzie, are you still on? If you could drop the link. Oh, she's on it. Okay. the link-
Mackenzie, that was great. Perfect timing.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for being on this call. It's been really great to learn from you and discuss. So thank you.
Well, you did a great job making the presentation. So looking ahead to our next webinar will be June the 2nd. And we're having the village manager from Mamaroneck, New York. His name is Jerry Barbiero. And they have been managing their township property without pesticides or synthetic fertilizers for a few years. So, you know, here's a person who's been doing it successfully, and we want to get his information out to everybody on. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.